I thought I knew my husband, Mark, better than anyone. 20 years of marriage, 2 wonderful kids. We were supposed to be rock solid. But one misplaced phone call shattered everything. What I found on his secret second device wasn't just an affair. It was an entirely different life he'd been living right under my nose. My name is Sarah, and I'm 48 years old. For the past 2 decades, my life revolved around my husband, Mark, and our 2 kids, Emily and Josh. We had what I thought was a good life. A comfortable home in the suburbs, regular family dinners, the occasional weekend getaway. Nothing too flashy, but it was ours, and I was content. Mark worked in finance, a steady job that provided well for us. I had a fulfilling career as a librarian, something I was passionate about. We weren't the most exciting couple, maybe a little predictable, but we were a team. Or so I believed. It all started with a misplaced phone. It was a Saturday morning, and Mark had gone out for his usual golf game with his buddies. I was in the kitchen, making pancakes for Emily and Josh, when I heard a phone ringing from the living room. It wasn't my phone, and it wasn't the house phone. I figured Mark had forgotten his cell, which wasn't unusual. He could be a bit absent-minded sometimes. I went to grab it, intending to call him and let him know. But when I picked it up, the screen was locked, and it wasn't his usual phone. This one was smaller, sleeker, a model I didn't recognize. My eyebrows furrowed. Mark always got the latest gadgets, but he usually showed them off. This felt secretive. Curiosity, that pesky little thing, got the better of me. I tried his usual passwords, our anniversary, the kids' birthdays, but none worked. It was then that a seed of unease started to sprout in my stomach. Why would Mark have a second phone, and why would it be locked with a password I didn't know? Emily, my 16-year-old, came into the kitchen, her nose already twitching at the smell of pancakes. "Morning, Mom. Where's Dad?" "Golf. He forgot his phone," I said, holding up the unfamiliar device. "This isn't his usual one, though." Josh, my 14-year-old, ambled in next, already glued to his own phone. "Maybe it's a work phone?" he mumbled, not looking up. "No, his work phone is different," I replied, my mind racing. Mark had a company-issued phone, a bulky thing he mostly used for calls and emails. This was definitely a personal device. The phone rang again, a different ringtone this time. The caller ID showed a name I didn't recognize. Chloe. My heart did a little flutter kick. Who was Chloe? I knew I shouldn't, but the temptation was too strong. While the kids were distracted with their breakfast, I slipped back into the living room and tried a few more passwords, random numbers, anything that came to mind. Finally, on a whim, I tried our house number, and it unlocked. My breath hitched. The home screen was just a standard wallpaper, but the moment I opened the Messages app, my world tilted on its axis. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of messages with Chloe, and the tone, it wasn't professional. It was flirtatious, intimate, filled with emojis and pet names. My hand started to tremble as I scrolled through the messages. They talked about their day, their inside jokes, plans for meeting up. There were messages like, "Can't wait to see you tonight, handsome," and "Thinking of you all day, my Chloe." My stomach churned. This couldn't be happening. Mark? My Mark? The man I shared my life with, the father of my children? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I sank onto the sofa, the phone clutched in my hand like a venomous snake. I had to see more. I clicked on the photos. There were pictures of Mark, smiling, looking younger and happier than I'd seen him in years. And then there were pictures of Chloe. She was younger, maybe in her early 30s, with long blonde hair and a bright, carefree smile. There were selfies of them together, laughing, holding hands. My vision blurred with tears. It wasn't just an affair. It looked like a whole other relationship, a secret life Mark had been carefully cultivating behind my back. How long had this been going on? I spent the rest of the morning in a daze, the phone my constant companion. I scrolled through everything, the messages, the photos, even the call logs. They talked almost every day, sometimes multiple times a day. They had been seeing each other for at least a year, maybe longer. The more I read, the more details I uncovered. They went on trips together. Business trips Mark had told me about. They celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, dates that I thought were special to us. My heart ached with a pain I had never felt before. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer depth of the deception. When Mark finally came home, whistling and cheerful, I was sitting on the porch swing, the second phone lying innocently beside me. He looked surprised to see me. "Hey, you're out here," he said, leaning in for a kiss. I turned my head slightly, avoiding his lips. He frowned. "Everything okay?" I picked up the phone and held it out to him. His face went white. He knew. "What is this?" he stammered, his eyes darting around as if the neighbors might be watching. "Don't play dumb, Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside me. "I found your little secret." He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared at the phone in my hand. Then he let out a long, defeated sigh. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain what, Mark?" "Explain how you've been living a double life for God knows how long? Explain how you could look me in the eye every day and lie?" My voice started to tremble now, the carefully constructed dam of my emotions beginning to crack. He sat down heavily on the swing beside me, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I scoffed. "You're having an affair, Mark. There's nothing complicated about that." "It's not just an affair," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Chloe, she's more than that." More than that? What could be more than an affair? My mind raced, trying to comprehend the implications of his words. "What do you mean more than that?" I asked, my voice laced with dread. He hesitated, looking everywhere but at me. She has a daughter. My daughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter? Mark had another child? A child I knew nothing about? My carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces. "Your daughter?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign and wrong on my tongue. "How? When?" He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. "It was years ago, before we got married. I didn't know about her until recently. Chloe contacted me a little over a year ago." A little over a year ago. That coincided perfectly with the timeline of the messages I had read. So, this affair wasn't just about physical attraction. It was tied to this secret child. "And you didn't think to tell me?" I asked, my voice rising. "Your wife? The mother of your children?" "I was scared," he confessed. "Scared of what you would think. Scared of what it would do to our family." "Scared?" I repeated incredulously. "Mark, you've been living a lie for over a year. You've been sneaking around, having another relationship, and keeping a child a secret from me. How could you?" Tears streamed down my face now, hot and angry. The betrayal was immense, suffocating. "I know I messed up, Sarah. I know I hurt you," he said, reaching for my hand. I flinched away from his touch. "Hurt me?" "Mark, you've ripped my heart out," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I don't even know who you are anymore." The kids came running out of the house, drawn by the sound of our raised voices. "Mom? Dad? What's wrong?" Emily asked, her eyes wide with concern. Mark and I exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement that our carefully constructed facade had crumbled. How were we going to explain this to them? How could we ever go back to normal? "We need to talk," I said, standing up. "All of us." The conversation that followed was the hardest of my life. We sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken accusations and raw emotions. Mark tried to explain, to justify his actions, but his words sounded hollow and unconvincing. He talked about his surprise at finding out about his daughter, his desire to be a part of her life, his fear of losing me and our kids. Emily and Josh listened in stunned silence, their faces pale and confused. They couldn't understand how their dad, the man they looked up to, could have kept such a huge secret. "So, you have another daughter?" Josh asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "A sister we didn't know about?" Mark nodded, his eyes filled with tears. Her name is Lily. She's 10 years old. 10 years old. For 10 years, this child had existed, and I had no idea. For 10 years, Mark had carried this secret, and it had driven him into the arms of another woman. The weight of it all was crushing. My marriage, my family, everything I thought was real felt like a carefully crafted illusion that had just been shattered. I looked at Mark, the man I had loved for half my life, and I saw a stranger. That night, Mark slept on the sofa. The silence in our bedroom was deafening, broken only by my occasional sobs. I couldn't bear to be near him, the man who had so completely betrayed my trust. The next few weeks were a blur of arguments, tears, and painful revelations. We tried to talk, but every conversation seemed to lead to more hurt and anger. Mark insisted that he loved me, that he wanted to make things right. But the foundation of our relationship had been irrevocably damaged. I found myself constantly looking at him, searching for the man I thought I knew, but all I saw was a liar, a cheat, someone who had prioritized his own secrets and desires over our family. I started to withdraw, spending more time at work, finding solace in the familiar comfort of books and quiet solitude. Emily and Josh were equally distant, their resentment towards their father palpable. The happy, bustling home we once shared felt cold and empty. One evening, as I was scrolling through social media, a picture popped up on my feed. It was a photo of Mark, his arm around a young girl with blonde hair, both of them beaming at the camera. The caption read, "My two favorite people." It was posted by Chloe. The sight of it sent a fresh wave of pain through me. He wasn't just involved with Chloe. He was playing happy families with her and his secret daughter, while our own family was falling apart. The audacity of it was staggering. I felt a surge of anger, a fierce protectiveness towards my own children. They didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve this. I knew then that things couldn't go on like this. I couldn't continue to live in this web of lies and deceit. I deserved better, and so did my kids. The conversation was brutal. I laid it all out for Mark, my voice trembling but firm. I showed him the picture I found on Chloe's Instagram, the one where he looked so happy with her and Lily. I told him I couldn't reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man who had been living this elaborate lie. He pleaded, he cried, he promised to do anything to win me back. He said he'd cut ties with Chloe, that he'd focus solely on our family, but his words felt hollow. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. "Mark," I said, my voice flat, "you didn't just have an affair. You kept a child a secret from me for 10 years. That's not something I can just forgive and forget." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate kind of sadness. "So, this is it? After all these years?" "After all these years. You should have been honest with me," I replied, standing up. "I deserve better than this, and so do Emily and Josh." The kids, who had been listening from the hallway, came into the living room. Emily, ever the pragmatist, asked the question that was hanging in the air. "So, what happens now, Mom?" "Your father and I are going to separate," I said, trying to keep my voice steady for their sake. The news hit them hard. Josh's face crumpled and Emily's eyes filled with tears. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do, watching their pain. But I knew staying in a broken marriage would only cause them more heartache in the long run. Mark moved out a few days later, taking with him a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of regrets, I assumed. The house felt eerily quiet without him, but also lighter. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks had finally dissipated. The following months were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, difficult conversations with the kids, and trying to navigate my new reality as a single woman. It was hard, incredibly hard. There were days I felt like I couldn't get out of bed. Days I questioned my decision. Days I missed the comfort and familiarity of my old life. But slowly, gradually, I started to find my footing. I leaned on my friends, reconnected with hobbies I had neglected over the years, and focused on my kids. Emily and Josh, though initially upset, eventually started to adjust. They saw that I was happier, more at peace, even amidst the challenges. Mark tried to stay in contact, calling and texting frequently, wanting to see the kids. I allowed it for their sake, but I kept our interactions brief and civil. I needed space to heal, and I couldn't do that with him constantly in my life. About 6 months after Mark moved out, I received a message from an unknown number. It was a simple text. "Hi, Sarah, it's Chloe. I know this is probably the last person you want to hear from, but I felt I needed to reach out." My first instinct was to ignore it, to block the number and move on. But something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a morbid desire to understand the woman who had played such a significant role in the destruction of my marriage. I replied, "What do you want, Chloe?" Her response came quickly. "I just wanted to apologize for everything. I know my apology probably doesn't mean much, but I truly am sorry for the pain I caused you and your family." I stared at the message, a mix of disbelief and a strange sense of something. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps a flicker of understanding. We exchanged a few more messages, and eventually I agreed to meet her for coffee. I needed to see her, to hear her side of the story, even if it was just to put my own mind at ease. When I met Chloe, she was exactly as she looked in her pictures. Young, vibrant, but with a sadness in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before. She was nervous, fidgeting with her coffee cup as she spoke. She told me about her relationship with Mark, how it had started as a casual fling years ago, before he and I were married. She explained that she hadn't told him about Lily right away, unsure of his reaction. When she finally did, a little over a year ago, Mark was initially shocked, but then became incredibly involved in Lily's life. Chloe admitted that she knew Mark was married, that she shouldn't have continued the relationship. She said she fell in love with him and believed his promises that he would eventually leave me. She claimed she was just as blindsided as I was when I found out about his double life. I listened to her story, trying to piece together the puzzle of Mark's betrayal. It didn't excuse his actions, but it gave me a little more insight into the situation. Chloe seemed genuinely remorseful, and I could see the toll the affair had taken on her as well. She told me about Lily, about how much Mark loved being a father to her, how he would often talk about Emily and Josh with pride. It was a strange conversation, filled with awkward silences and unspoken resentments, but it was also surprisingly cathartic. By the end of our coffee, I didn't hate Chloe anymore. I felt a strange mix of pity and understanding. We were both victims of Mark's deception, albeit in different ways. Life after Mark was a journey of rediscovery. I focused on my career, took up painting again, and spent more quality time with Emily and Josh. We started new traditions, went on different kinds of vacations, and slowly, we started to heal as a family. Emily went off to college a couple of years later, and Josh started driving. Life moved on, as it always does. I even started dating again, hesitantly at first, but eventually found someone who appreciated me for who I was, someone who was honest and trustworthy. Mark remained a part of our lives, primarily through the kids. He was a good father, despite his flaws, and he made an effort to be there for Emily and Josh. We even managed to be civil to each other at their graduations and other important events. Years passed. Emily got married and Josh started his own career. I became a grandmother, a role I absolutely adored. Life had a way of surprising you, even after the most difficult times. One day, I received a message from Mark. It was simple and to the point. "Sarah, I'm sick. It's not good." I felt a pang of something. Not quite sympathy, but a recognition of our shared history. We had spent half our lives together, after all. I called him, and we talked for a long time. He told me about his diagnosis, about his fears and regrets. He apologized again, his voice weak and filled with remorse. I listened, offering words of comfort, not because I had fully forgiven him, but because it felt like the right thing to do. We had a past, a shared history, and despite the pain he had caused, I didn't want to see him suffer. I visited him in the hospital a few times. It was strange seeing him so frail and vulnerable. We talked about the kids, about old times, about everything and nothing. There were no grand reconciliations, No sudden bursts of forgiveness, just a quiet acceptance of what was and what had been. Mark passed away a few months later. It was a strange feeling, a mix of sadness and a sense of finality. The chapter of my life that involved him was finally closed. Looking back, I can see how that discovery of the second phone changed everything. It was a painful and devastating experience, but it also forced me to reevaluate my life, to realize my own strength and resilience. I learned that even after years of what seems like unwavering stability, life can throw you a curveball. But you can get through it. You can rebuild. You can find happiness again, even after the deepest betrayal. And sometimes, the secrets we uncover, however painful, can ultimately lead us to a stronger, more authentic version of ourselves. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was my life, and I had learned to embrace it, flaws and all.